Hi everyone, welcome to Dementia UK's research webinar series. It's great to have so many of you with us today. Today we're looking at the topic of distance carers for people living with dementia. My name is Phil Jodrell. I'm a research fellow here at Dementia UK in the research and publications team. Today we've got three presentations for you. We'll be hearing about the Consider project at the University of Greenwich, and then we're thinking a bit about the research taking place here at the charity on this topic, before finally hearing from one of our Admiral nurses about their experiences supporting distance carers in their role as a specialist dementia nurse. So the format of today's webinar is that we'll have three presentations that run back to back, and then we'll have a Q&A session in the final part of the webinar. So if you have questions or comments as we go, feel free to post them. The chat section is the chat function is open, the Q&A function is open, and then we'll gather them together during the Q&A in the final part. Okay, so I'm now going to hand over to Aisha Kafadar, who is our first speaker today, and I'll let Aisha introduce her presentation.
Okay, thank you so much, Phil, again. My name is Aisha Kafadar, and thank you so much for attending today's webinar. I will talk about our project name is Consider, which is about recognizing and supporting distance dementia care. In this project, we have a big research team. I am working with Andrew Clark and Tiffany James from University of Greenwich, and Adelina Comas Herrera. She is an expert in station analysis. She is from London School of Economics. And we are working with Caroline White. She is expert with distance dementia care. She is from the University of Hull. We are working with Fauzia Knight and Monica Liverton from King's College London. They are expert with qualitative interviews, especially photo voice method. We are also working with Dementia UK, Phil Jodrell, providing us consultation about how we can improve the distance dementia care. And also we have a PPI member in our research team, Jagdish Brar-Orgil. She is a former distance carer for her mom. So yeah, we have a good big team on this project. The project will take 18 months to complete. It includes 3 work packages. Today I will mainly talk about the work package 1, which is a stational analysis. The second work package is about the qualitative interviews. I will talk about it a little bit more at the end of our presentation, because we now recruiting some our participants. And the work package 3 will include 2 co-production workshops with 12 stakeholders to develop 3 key research outputs. Those are defining tips for distance dementia carers, defining priorities for research and policy, and developing guidance for home care workers. As I said, today I will focus on work package 1. It's a stational analysis. Stational analysis is like taking a snapshot of what's happening now. And I should say this research at the beginning just focused on general distance care. I did research for distance care rather than dementia distance care. But then we will move forward to the distance dementia care. Our aim is to identify examples of good practice and highlight areas requiring policy and procedural development in distance care. Our method included doing scoping review of literature on distance care in the UK to understand what kind of research already have been done and what we can do better. Then we reviewed of existing legislation and policies, including Care Act 2014, to see what kind of rules there are about the care assessment and being as a carer in the Care Act 2014. And then we reviewed of National Health and Care Support Organization plans about distance care. Those are included NHS included Cares UK, Care Trust, Age UK, Dementia UK, and Alzheimer's Society. We just check their website and try to understand what kind of information there are on their websites. And then we did audit of local authority websites. Today's presentation will mainly focus on this part of this research. And our next step will be the interviewing with relevant professional stakeholders, because when we are doing this research, we realize that, yes, something may be in the documentation, but they may be not working, or some things, there are maybe some good practices we didn't aware of on the, in the researcher on the website. So we will do some interviews later on, but this is still ethical approval process. So I won't talk about those interviews today. So before I talk about what we have done analysis, I would like to say, what is distance care? Distance care is mainly providing unpaid care from geographical separation. It mainly takes at least 1 hour to travel time to reach the cared for person. This can include transnational care. This means one carer and the cared for person may live in different countries. Distance care is largely invisible in policy, practice, and research, although they experience unique challenges like they need to travel, handle with the travel cost from a distance. They need to handle with the care coordinations, which is taking so much time to handle this kind of a coordination from a distance. It sometimes causing so many access issues. Distance carers mainly experience emotional impact because of they are feeling like guilt or worry all the time because of not being there. They're also experiencing physical and mental health issues due to the stress of being at distance care. I should say this, distance carers do so much things. They have multiple roles to provide care from a distance. Those are including personal care during visits, which also affect their leisure time activities with their loved ones because they need to handle those kind of issues in a short time frame. They need to do the housework when they are there, and also they need to do home maintenance coordination from a distance. They also do care management from a distance, like arranging appointments for a person with dementia. They also do some coordination with the services, including the cleaning services from a distance when they need. They also do crisis management when they personally experience some events like falls, wandering, behavioral crisis, or hospital admissions. This means they need to act very fast in a short time manner. They also do some financial support, including it may include buying medicines for their loved ones, or even it can be like managing their online banking. They also arranging power of attorney, which is also giving so much emotional, burden to the carer. They also do some emotional support from a distance, like via video calls or phone calls to provide some, connection. They also do the technology coordination, like it may include setting up a computer or laptop to do some kind of video calls, or it may even include some setting up alarm sensors or GPS, or sometimes camera to see the real condition of the person they cared for. They also updating local care networks because they need to work with someone local. If they have someone in local, like family members, friends, and neighbors, they also keep updating the networks in case of any emergency station they need to be aware of. However, distance cares remain under-recognized. The CARE Act 2014 states that distance care are unlikely to be suitable for involvement in the assessment of a person with care needs. And our scoping review showed that previous studies report distance cares have been denied support. However, CARE Act 2014 states that all family carers should be entitled to a care assessment. As I said, we did local authority website audit. At the beginning, I checked 317 UK local authorities websites, then excluded 165 distinct councils because they share social care responsibility with county councils. We focus on the remain 152 councils that provide social care. Those are including county councils, unitary authorities, metropolitan districts, and London boroughs. On their websites, we try to understand what are the eligibility criteria for care assessment, whether they are explicitly mentioned of distance cares or location as a eligibility criteria, whether whether the information clear on their website and is accessible. We also check whether they have any guidance documents and fact sheets for distance care. The website search showed us only 11 councils explicitly mentioned distance in their information about eligibility for care assessment. So we decided to do contacting rest of 141 local authorities via email, online inquiry forms, or freedom of information requests. 66 of them respond our queries, and 58 consuls said confirmed they provide support for all carers regardless of location, as long as the person cared for lives within their authority, as CARE Act 2014 requests. And I'm saying that again, those informations not accessible and visible on their website. 8 consuls replies reflect some conflict and misunderstanding to CARE Act policy. And when we ask our queries to this website, 2 more consuls reported having specific information for distance cares on their websites. And we are believing that this is our first positive impact of our research, because 2 more consuls put more information on their websites about distance cares. Blackburn with Darwin Borough Council even put some cross-boundary protocol, but they told us this is they are unable to provide documentation. And Shropshire Council created new guidance specifically for distance cares following our inquiry. And I suggest you to maybe we can look at it. It's visible and on the website, and I believe it's a good one. And after after contacting local authorities, the number reached 13. Now 13 consuls explicitly stated distance cares information and service on their website, but you can see it's just 8% of it, so it's still a low average. Other consuls reported that they do not have specific protocols or guidance, but some of them developed some strategies, such as relying on individualist and case-by-case approaches, including remote assessment, signposting to local and national resources, giving online training and courses, providing virtual carers groups and peer support meetings. Some of the consuls even providing some technology support, like providing some hubs, apps, and monitoring systems. But the absence of formal protocols raises concerns about consistency and equity of access. This means distance care's experience may vary significantly depending on which staff member handles their case, their knowledge of cross-boundary coordination, and their negotiation skills with other local authorities, potentially leading to postcode lottery outcomes. Based on our scoping review and also the website check, we define some preliminary dementia-specific implications. This situation is even harder for people with dementia and their carers, because for distance care arrangements may create complex challenges for them. Because progressive communication difficulties can necessitate greater reliance on care professionals to facilitate family contact. Memory impairment may lead to not recognizing distant family members via video, or they may even forget contact schedules. Behavioral change can require rapid information sharing with distance carers. Cognitive decline may affect technology use, which may make the remote monitoring increasingly difficult. Persons with dementia may minimize difficulties to spare care's anxiety, preventing accurate assessment of needs. Distance cares may be excluded from diagnostic consultations, care planning meetings, and receiving second-hand reports from their local family members, friends, or neighbors, and rather than direct communication from professionals. So, based on our website check, we have some initial recommendations to support better distance dementia cares. One consul said that distance carers must see the person they care for in person to qualify for an assessment. This shows they don't understand how caring for someone with dementia from a distance actually works. So we are recommending that consuls need to recognize that managing and coordinating dementia care from a distance, even without regular face-to-face visits, is still intensive, demanding work that seriously affects the care's health and well-being. And these carers have a legal right to an assessment and support. Another consul said that carers who live far away can't be providing urgent and ongoing care, and described distance caring as just paperwork and emotional support. This completely misses what caring for someone with dementia from a distance actually involves. So we are recommending consuls need to understand that caring for someone with dementia from a distance means constantly managing and coordinating their care, which seriously affects the care's own health and well-being. Consul staff needs specific training about what dementia care actually involves. Several councils appear to prioritize hands-on physical care over care coordination when assessing distance care eligibility and needs. So we recommend care assessment for distance dementia carers must specifically address crisis management, emergency planning, and support needed during acute incidents. Many councils admit that local services may not be helpful if the carer lives in a different area. For example, care support groups are usually local. Yes, but they don't offer any solution for how distance carers can get the dementia-specific help they need. So we are recommending to councils to set up online support groups or networks specifically for dementia carers so distance carers can join from anywhere. And also work with admiral nurses and dementia charities to offer remote specialist support. And then causes cannot agree on who is responsible for assessing a distance care. This can create serious problems, especially because the person with dementia often cannot speak up for their carer or explain how much help they need. So councils need to have clear and straightforward process for distance dementia cares that include working with people who have legal power of attorney. And also give each distance carer one named contact person who understands dementia, distance caring, and how to work across different councils areas. While I'm trying to reach out councils, I realized some practical barriers to ask my basic questions, like hidden contact information on websites. I tried really hard to find some phones or emails, even sometimes inquiry forms, but it was really hard for me. And there was some forms with postcode restricted forms like for general inquiry. So if this distance case from a different councils, they cannot even ask their questions because they cannot provide a postcode with their name from the same councils with their third form. So the information navigation really complex. I know some councils only give you some phone number to contact with them, but I think it's not a good option having only one phone contact because some people may not feel comfortable to talk on phone. They may even have some kind of hearing conditions, or they may feel anxious when they try to speak on phone, or they may even have the English as a second language. Those kind of issues may cause not seeking help for themselves. So we are recommending to councils that they provide multiple accessible contact methods, including email, phone, online form, or post, remove postcode restriction from inquiry forms. This is doable because many councils did this. They didn't require for any postcode to ask some general queries. And ensure websites are accessible and clearly signpost distance dementia care and support. Care support, and offer care navigation support, helping distance dementia carers access appropriate services. The other issue is that outdated handbooks. Outdated handbooks stating only residents of the local authority are eligible can stop distance carers from seeking support. So we are recommending to provide updated, consistent care assessment eligibility criteria on websites, handbooks, and in staff responses. Because when I contact them and check their handbooks, sometimes handbooks have the correct information, but staff giving me totally opposite answers, and sometimes staffs are right, they are giving me a right answer, and it's simultaneous with the Care Act 2014. But when I check the handbooks, it's the opposite. There wasn't anything related to distance care, or if they're just saying both carer and the cared for person need to live in the local area, which is the wrong one. And they need to provide clear, accessible information about how distance dementia carers can access assessment. Now I will a little bit talk about work package 2. We will do qualitative interviews with people with dementia, family carers, and home care workers. Because, as I explained, family carers do so much things from a distance, and also home care workers who visit the person's home regularly provide some help with daily tasks like washing, meals, or medication. These two groups need to work as a team, because the family care cannot be there every day, so home care workers become their eyes and ears, noticing changes, reporting concerns, and providing daily support. To understand how home care workers and distance family carers can work better together to support the person with dementia, we are including them in the study. This is our study advert. We would like to speak to people living with dementia who receive support from home care staff and support from family or friends who live 1 or more hours away. Family and friends carers supporting a person living with dementia who receives support from home care staff and who lives 1 or more hours away. And also we would like to speak with home care staff who support people living with dementia whose family members live at a distance to better understand how we can improve this process for them. What will happen if they take this study? You will have the opportunity to discuss the research and ask questions. You will have a conversation lasting 20 to 45 minutes with a researcher, me or Tiffany, who will ask about your experience of having or giving support from a distance. You can also take some photographs that represent your experience of distance care, which we can look at and talk about during the interview, but this is totally optional. If you are interested in taking part in this research or want more information, if you have follow-up thoughts, please contact with me or Tiffany James. Thank you so much for your attention.
Thanks, Aisha. That's brilliant. I know I'm biased as a project partner on Consider, but it's just really interesting work, and I think the volume of work that you've been able to do, given that this only started in the beginning of October last year, is really phenomenal. So yeah, brilliant. Thank you for presenting that today. So I'm the next presenter. I'm going to share my screen. Okay, so this presentation is about the work that the research team at Dementia UK is doing in this field, with a focus on an evidence review of the experiences of distance carers supporting people living with dementia. I'll start by providing a brief overview of the research we're doing here at Dementia UK, and we'll then look at the evidence review for distance carers with a focus on the findings. And at the end, we'll touch on what's next for this work. So in 2023, Dementia UK published their first research strategy, and this was to reflect the growing demand for research across the charity and the need to focus our research activities and collaborations on the issues that are most important to people affected by dementia. 3 research priorities were identified through a 6-month consultation process involving more than 100 people. These are stakeholders such as people living with dementia, family carers, Admiral nurses, Dementia UK staff, researchers, service managers, commissioners. Lots of people had their say in this, and we brought together the strategy and the priorities from this. And in delivering the strategy, we want to ensure that the support of Admiral nurses is reaching the most vulnerable and excluded people living with dementia and their families in our society. So these are our 3 priorities that focus on individuals with dementia who continually face barriers to post-diagnostic support. As you can see, the distance care work sits within our priority for people with dementia who are living alone, which reflects the fact that some of this population will be supported by informal carers who live at a distance. This presentation and this whole webinar, in fact, is quite like a double header, if you like, with a webinar that we had in November last year, focusing on the work on the living alone side of this priority. If you were there, it was great to have you with us again. If you weren't, you can catch up with this on our webinar page on the Dementia UK website. There'll be a link to that towards the end of the event. But today we're going to focus on the distance care side of things to fit with the theme. So we began this work by conducting evidence reviews to make sure that we're starting from an informed position and building on what's already known. And we're then looking at how we can take this information and further the knowledge by conducting our own internally funded research involving our Admiral nurses. And then we're going to implement our findings within the charity and across Admiral nurse services. We're also supporting other national research projects, as you've heard, such as Consider. And but before moving on, I just want to highlight the role of our Research Strategy Advisory Group, who've been involved in all aspects of this work since it started. So each of the 3 priorities that you've seen has a dedicated advisory group that comprises members either with lived experience or who have an active interest in the topic. And so for this work, we've got a fantastic and committed group of people living with dementia, current or former family carers with direct experience of living alone or providing care from a distance. We've also got 3 Admiral nurses, a Dementia UK staff member, and 2 external academics as well. So we're well served in this group. We meet twice a year as a full group, and then I keep the advisory group up to date with a monthly newsletter summarising the work across this priority and the other work as well, if they're interested. And the sorts of work that we get involved with, they review and comment on papers, presentations, study materials. As an example, we're currently developing a survey for this work, which I'll speak more about at the end. And this was developed with 2 of the animal nurses in the group, and then it's currently now with the whole group for comment. And just as an example of how responsive and dedicated they are, I sent it out one day last week, and within 24 hours I'd had three people come back to me with really detailed comments. So it's really a pleasure to work with them. So moving now to the evidence reviews. So for the purpose of this, as I said, we separated the topics. So we won't be looking at the living alone review, but focusing on the distance carers. So the question that we looked at for this was, what are the experiences of informal carers supporting people living with dementia from a distance? And we were interested in describing the distance care experience as it's reported in the literature, and also trying to identify the factors that lead to positive and negative experiences that people describe. So just a brief look at the methods. These were developed, as I say, in consultation with our research strategy advisory group. We actually had a small working group of the advisory group members. So just asking anyone who wants to kind of do a dedicated bit of work on it. We got together sort of more regularly on a kind of I think every couple of weeks during this, just to kind of discuss how the review was going and any questions that were coming up. And one of the big things that the advisory group was advising on was around the inclusion and exclusion criteria and the terms that we use to search through the literature. So the inclusion criteria, when it says distance undefined, what that means is we weren't imposing a definition of distance. I actually touched on it in her presentation as to some of the ways in which you can define distance for distance carers, and there are multiple ways, and different pieces of research have got their own. So rather than us saying it has to be a certain way, we allowed the researchers in the publications to define distance themselves, and as long as it covered a physical distance as opposed to an emotional distance, then we saw it as being relevant for this work. The carers, the distance carers, could be primary or secondary, so they could be the only carer for a person, or they could be caring alongside a local person or group of people. And even though this is a topic of people living alone with dementia, again, for this work, we didn't say that the care recipient had to be living alone. The reason for this is partly because it's a new and emerging topic. There isn't a huge amount of research published in this area, so excluding on any of sort of these bases would have further reduced the amount of work that we could actually draw from. But also, I think the challenges involved in caring from a distance, there are some which will be sort of, I guess, amplified with the person who's living alone, but there'll also be things which are relevant for people who are living in maybe with a spouse or a partner, or with an adult child, for example, which are still important. And then the only real notable exclusion criteria we had was that it was a paper focused on dementia as opposed to mild cognitive impairment. The terms are there, just covering the 3 topics, so dementia, informal care, and some form of distance. And those are some of the terms when you sort of look through the literature that were coming up regularly. So this just gives us sort of an overview of the papers. The first thing to spot is that there's 12 articles. It's not a huge amount of research here, and I think that speaks to sort of what Aisha said around this being a kind of an invisible group, if you like, at the moment in policy and practice and research. So the 12 articles were published between 2002 and 2025. There were mainly qualitative in nature, and then some cross-sectional feasibility, pilot, and a service evaluation. Sample sizes from the small to the sort of medium, I guess, 107. And the majority of the carers that were included were female adult children of the person with dementia. In terms of how they define distance within the papers, so 4 were defined by travel time, so either greater than 1 or greater than 2 hours, and then 3 that were focused specifically on the sort of the transnational experience of caregiving, were their definition of distance was the geographic boundaries, and then the remaining 5 didn't include a definition for themselves. So 5 papers looked at directly at the distance care experience. So interviewing people who were providing distance care and asking them for their their reports of their experience. So 3 of those were done within a single nation, and 2 were transnational, so between 2 or more countries. 2 looked at the use of technology. So 1 was looking at virtual reality, shared experience, and another was looking at remote monitoring. And then there was 1 more recent paper which was looking at a remote psychoeducational intervention called LD Care, which is, I think that's there's a feasibility study hopefully leading to a bigger trial. So it sounds like there may be something being developed as an intervention for this area, which would be great. And the feasibility study showed positive results. And then the remaining 4 looked at sort of specific aspects of care with mixed samples of local and distance carers. So, for example, there was 1 that focused on the particular topic of people who were working, professionally working, and in addition to having a distance care role. So just briefly going to touch on the themes that were identified within the research, and just to give a feel of what sort of what experiences people were reporting. So firstly, emotional and physical health. There was a sort of reports of high levels of stress, which were, you might say, common to all carers, but specific aspects which were exacerbated by the distance. And then descriptions of people attempting to make up for their perceived absence, through sort of intense care focused visits where they would go for a period of time and try to get through a lot of tasks which may make that visit feel quite strained, adding to the stress sort of when they're there and then when they're back. Anxiety was reported in 2 of the studies. 1 which compared groups of local and distance carers found that the distance carers actually had higher levels of anxiety. And then there were some reports as well of physical health being impacted. So particularly among carers who had their own existing long-term conditions, that the impact of distance caring was having an effect, a negative effect on their health. But not all the reports were negative. There were some reports of distance carers experiencing the distance carers being a positive impact, and this talks about sort of emotional fulfillment and satisfaction from being able to take on a role such as distance care. The second theme is looking at the practical challenges of being a distance carer. So one of the things that was described in the studies was around a sort of a choice between long distance travel after a family member is diagnosed with dementia, or relocation. That choice between the 2, and that the relocation could be of the carer themselves or of the person with dementia closer to them. And again, thinking about that impact of person, whether they're employed, so the impact on their work, and also the impact of their employment terms on their ability to provide care from a distance. So do they have that flexibility to be able to make long distance journeys at short notice sometimes, or for people who have less flexibility, that was perceived as obviously more of a challenge. Again, yeah, obvious one really, but financial implications and the affordability of care. So when decisions are made as to whether to bring in additional services, maybe home carers, or when conversations go into around whether institutional care is needed, those conversations around finances come into play. There's also a lot of, with there being several papers looking at the transnational impact, there were some which found that the complexity of providing care across different boundaries and countries, such as language barriers when trying to coordinate care and speak to professionals, as well as operating in different time zones and trying to be attending meetings which aren't necessarily convenient hours. Yeah, the cultural context links again to those transnational papers mainly. And this was descriptions of people who experience sort of cultural expectations and cultural norms surrounding family care. So particular moral obligations of sort of filial responsibility to care for aging parents, and there was this sort of link to people feeling reports of sort of guilt and shame around not being able to do that as well, or for not being in the same location. And then the stigma of institutional care, again, between different countries and cultures. Some people reported this idea that in the country where the person with dementia was living, the idea of institutional care might be quite have a lot of stigma attached to it, whereas the country that they moved to was much more open to institutional care and much more used to people with dementia being cared for in those contexts. So that kind of feeling of people around them saying, well, why don't you just talk to them about going into a home, where their own sort of family experience of that would be very negative. So there's kind of juxtaposition of those things. In terms of communication, information sharing, so the sort of the difficulty of obtaining information from a distance and being overly reliant on secondhand information. There was a description, the term sort of detective work being used by distance carers, navigating the memory of events that are in the past, so catching up with what appointments people have had, and the reports of either the person with dementia themselves or family members, giving them back but maybe not having all the details. Sometimes having people family members in denial maybe of the symptoms that are present, or downplaying issues. There were some descriptions around people not wanting to worry people because they weren't there all the time, and they have these maybe conversations over the phone or visits where they want to downplay actually what's happening because they don't want to worry the person. But of course in the long term maybe that's not so helpful. And another term used was around this orchestrator role that a person caring from a distance might take on, because there are certain tasks which they can do from a distance, sort of like coordinating appointments, coordinating things like deliveries or online shopping, that kind of thing. But then that sometimes raises issues around delegation and distribution of responsibility. Frustration with a lack of proactive communication from professionals is also reported. So people who may perceive distance carers as less involved and therefore not seek them out as readily as they might if they were a local carer. And then, so those are the themes. And then these were just some sort of some factors that were identifiable within the literature around risk factors that might lead to more negative experience with people, but also protective factors that might lead to more positive experiences. So I think looking through the list, most of them are probably self-explanatory. The national boundaries one that links to the transnational care. Throwing in not just distance, but distance between different countries, as we've heard, throws in some extra complications. And whether the person is a primary carer or whether they are part of a care network, and able to kind of take on that orchestrator role, with local carers doing more tasks that they can do being in the same place. Healthcare knowledge and the protective factors that relates to whether the distance care themselves or anybody in the care kind of network is maybe in healthcare themselves, and so just has that knowledge of where to go, who to speak to, was identified as something which might be helpful. So just obviously more things within the discussion, but just identified two key points. One based on information that was present in the literature, and another that was on information absent from the literature, really. So in terms of what was in the literature, this kind of trying to identify the unique aspects of distance care for dementia, as compared with caring for dementia in a more sort of close proximity. And it was kind of, we see it as this sort of interaction between these three things, that the people, distance carers reported that they lacked the knowledge of about dementia, about the condition of dementia. Also compared with local carers, that they were less likely to seek information. And then, of course, the distance itself affects the communication within the care network. So you've got this kind of interaction of things where people don't necessarily know as much about dementia, aren't seeking information as readily, and also not getting the information that they maybe would like from either their other informal carers or professional carers, and that kind of adding up to this increase in stress and anxiety around providing distance care. The other point I wanted to make was just around the absence of remote monitoring studies. There was one paper that reported this in the literature, which personally, as a sort of a researcher who's done a lot in the sort of the technology and digital technology space around dementia, I was quite surprised at that, because you'd think that people living alone with dementia and then distance care supporting would be the ideal target market for some of the sort of remote monitoring systems where you can, care essentially from a distance and look into various aspects of a person's safety and health around the home. But they just weren't not been tested in that context, it seems. So one thing might be around people with dementia living alone and able to use technology, whether that's actually true or just a stigma and a perception of people. I imagine it's a combination of both. And then there's another sort of thing that's coming into the literature base a little bit around suggestion that people with dementia who don't have a carer are often excluded from research because researchers are used to kind of recruiting care partners, dyads of people, and the consent process and all of that, and that maybe the fact that people aren't as readily recruited who don't have a carer, which would be someone living alone, might impact their sort of representation here. So that might be an additional issue. So the final thing I want to talk about is just what we're moving on to next, and that's the work with the Admiral nurses. So we're developing a survey to distribute to all of our Admiral nurses, asking questions such as how they're able to support people caring from a distance, and how they're supporting people living alone with dementia, across those sort of 3 domains of questions. We're hoping to distribute it in a few weeks' time, so sort of mid-Feb, and it'd be open for about 3 or 4 weeks to mid-March. So just as a small plug, if we do, this is just for Admiral nurses at the moment. So if we do have any Admiral nurses, here on at the webinar, just to say that this is coming in a few weeks, please look out for it, because obviously the more information we can gather from Admiral nurses, whether or not your service supports people living alone or supports distance carers, wanting to know just how the charity is currently offering support and what strategies are used, all of this will be incredibly important for this work. Okay, so that ends it, and it nicely sort of leads on actually to the next presentation, which is by one of our Admiral nurses, Mandy Cheen, who is going to talk about her experience of interacting with distance carers in her time as an Admiral nurse. So I'll hand over to Mandy now. Just give us a minute as the slides seem to be taking a moment to load.
Thank you. So thank you very much, Phil. Good afternoon. My name is Mandy Cheen. I'm one of the Admiral nurses working at Dementia UK's clinics and helpline team. And I made a few notes while the previous 2 of the speakers were making their presentations. And first of all, just wanted to say how saddened I was at the figures Aisha gave about the lack of understanding really by local authorities about the distance carers' importance and their role. And obviously the 2 presentations quite difficult to follow up, very interesting. My presentation is really more from the coal face, as it were, but hopefully will still be of value. So today really I want to try and cover or capture in this quite short presentation some of the emotional fallout I'm going to touch on from receiving a dementia diagnosis, because most people, or very often people, are living alone, and the wider family, obviously the impact on them, and particularly distance carers, and the kinds of calls that we might get from distance carers and from those living alone with dementia, and some common solutions really to the challenges that are presented. And I wanted to say really that first of all, callers will often focus on the things that their loved ones can't do anymore or may no longer be able to do. So we might get calls about asking, can mum still live alone? They're already leaping ahead to thinking about, should this individual go into a care home? Or the person calls and they're devastated, they don't want to have to think about going into a care home. Dementia is progressive, and as Wendy Mitchell, the author Wendy Mitchell, points out, it starts somewhere. And so it's important to catch the early stages of dementia really and use that as an opportunity for planning, at least for some of the things such as advanced wishes, power of attorney, and hospital level emergencies. Capacity, it's important to remember, is not lost on the day of the diagnosis. Even sometimes, obviously, capacity might be very fluctuant by then if the diagnosis has been made late. But it is important to remember that that diagnosis doesn't automatically mean that the person lacks capacity to make decisions about themselves. We often get calls about people refusing to see that there's a problem, or the person living with dementia in denial. I use this term anosognosia, which I'm sure a lot of you will be familiar with, but for those who are not, it's really just a fancy word for a loss of insight, which is caused by the dementia. The person's not consciously or unconsciously denying their diagnosis or the impact it's having or will have. So I see my role really as much supporting sort of problem solving, as well as giving a bit of education and a lot of emotional space really for the person living with the diagnosis or the loved one trying to plan really from a distance, just basically finding ways to meet the unique challenges one person living with dementia may face. So calls to the helpline. Giving time for callers to offload often their sort of darkest concerns to somebody who's not emotionally involved, not a family member, is often enough to allow them to start feeling a bit calmer, to open up, discuss the challenges that they're facing, and considering how some of those could be met. And so it's joint problem solving really for the person who's living with dementia, or the carer, and the nurse on the helpline. And I'm a nurse with a lot of experience and a lot of conversations to draw on as well. And often we can find more than one potential solution to be considered for each challenge. If the caller is caring from a distance, then they'll usually know the person well, even though they're living at a distance. This might be, the adult child of somebody who's living with dementia. And then we can draw out some ideas which we feel will work best. And sometimes the conversation can evolve that way. And if the caller is living with dementia and they live alone, the conversation can sometimes be circular and a bit repetitive, but that's okay as well. It's all about sitting down and really giving that person space to talk. And I've put here that the helpline really, we're in this unique position of giving people as much time as they need to articulate their fears, worries, and concerns. And that's what I really love about the job. There's no time limits on it. I've spent 2.5 hours on a call with people. And that's simply to give them the time that often they can't get with other professionals, and some of that guilt that they hold and feel unable to articulate to the GP, or and perhaps they don't have anybody to articulate that to. I'm there, and other nurses are there, and we can all support with that. So caring from a distance, and what does it look like? And I think sort of echoing some of the stuff that we've heard today, really, that people caring from a distance often don't see themselves as a carer because they're not usually providing hands-on care. So it's really important to get them to understand that, yes, they are caring, and what they're doing is a hugely important role. And some of these things that I've listed here have already been presented in the other presentations. So emotional support, you can't underestimate that really. Managing bills and appointments, trying to speak to doctors, sometimes with confidentiality issues that kind of really cause conflict there as well. Organising the Tesco delivery, coordination of care routines, perhaps care routines have kind of fallen apart a bit. Somebody's turning the carers away. How do they deal with that? And as Aisha mentioned earlier as well, sort of being available in those emergencies. Lots and lots of problem solving, and overall really encouraging that independence, which is critical. It's also really important to the person who's living with dementia that they hang on to their independence. It's one of their greatest fears often, that independence will be taken. And so in terms of meeting the challenges, as you can see from this list I've made, these are some of the challenges that we meet on our helpline daily. It can involve a lot of joint head scratching whilst we work through possible reasons and potential solutions Some of those might have already been tried, so it might be about going back to the drawing board and having a rethink. But early consideration of some of these potential problems can help. For example, in the early stages, perhaps having a conversation with that caller about setting up support via the GP. Can the GP allow access to some medical records with the right form filling? Understanding unique communication needs of the person who's living with dementia. And they're often overwhelming, but unexpressed fear of that loss of independence, which I'd already mentioned, and of people just taking over. And that's how it can feel. And sometimes it can be both parents needing support, where one has got a diagnosis of dementia, the other one may be suffering a little bit with physical health problems, as well as potential cognitive decline as well. And they often don't want to express to their adult children that there is a problem. So it's about trying to tease that out as well. Delirium, I always try to discuss whenever that topic comes up. I think it's such an important one. This is where, you get this sudden onset of confusion. We get a lot of calls about delirium, and it's something that we hear about so much. So it's important to me that that caller understands the potential for delirium to be a problem for that person living with dementia. So some of the common questions we've got, how can I get dad to go and get a diagnosis from the GP? Is there any financial support we can access? So we're often talking about benefits, for example, accepting help, trying to overcome confidentiality issues where, you might need to speak to the GP. Family members living with dementia turning away the carers, how to source a care agency. Mum's calling me repeatedly at work on the mobile. I don't know how to deal with that. And then your delirium, obviously, that you've noticed a lot of confusion and changed behavior in that person. Abuses of the power of attorney that's been noticed, and how do we get support and what's out there? So a huge number of challenges, and it's having that kind of database in your head of potential solutions, really. And so the solutions here, really, I have to remember as well that people are literally starting from scratch often in this journey. A very common phrase I hear is that I've never done this before and I've got no idea what I'm doing, so I'm not quite sure how it all works. And so a bit like the IT person who's going to teach the beginners in class how to manage a computer, I've literally got to remind myself that I've got to tell them how to switch the on button on. Sorry there, I think I just scrolled backwards there a minute. So it's about not taking anything for granted in terms of the caller's knowledge and experience, and starting right at the beginning, really. For previous common questions that I just showed on the previous slide, there are some solutions here which I can reach for straight away off the top of my head, and some which might mean some more in-depth discussion to ascertain context, to draw on the caller's understanding of the situation and any likely pitfalls. Changing somebody's communication style, for example, is not easy. It takes a great deal of tact to encourage understanding around the importance of not constantly challenging or correcting or trying to use logic as a way to garner peace. And often, as well, as has already been mentioned, long-standing poor family dynamics will also impact. And so some of the calls, you get this sense there's this kind of conflict between duty and love. And then, of course, having the plan B set up as well. So some of the common questions that we get asked, I've put some of the solutions here, speaking to GP, framing things so that they're appealing for the person with who's living with dementia, so that they are more likely to go along with what's needed, really. Can the distance carer be there for the first few visits when a carer comes, for example? Can they take carer's leave? And if they're abroad, could a neighbour help? Would they cope with the cleaner first, just as another pair of eyes in the community who's keeping an eye out for them? signposting to sort of areas for support with power of attorney, the court of protection, for example, mental capacity issues, supporting people to access PIP and attendance allowance, and then organisations like the Citizens Advice Bureau and Age UK to help with paperwork. Signposting to CQC or the Care Quality Commission for inspection reports, and then always reminding people that if they're going to employ somebody privately, to do their due diligence around that, because obviously what they don't want is somebody coming in that's untrustworthy. And I put here sort of setting up personalised messages for mum on the mobile, which can really help as well. And weekly themes, I just popped this slide in because I do report weekly on the themes that the nurses are seeing on the helpline, and that report goes on to senior staff. And if there's something that comes up that's really important, then senior staff will take action. It can flag up issues sometimes just on a one-off basis. So, for example, we had a memory assessment service who was directing patients to us in a way that sort of suggested that we'd be able to step in and help almost on a one-to-one basis. And obviously that's not what we do as a helpline. And so that was addressed immediately with the organisation being contacted directly. We get calls from all over the country as well as abroad. So some of that stuff is about, thinking about what resources do I have put to one side that I can go back to. We manage video calls with a number of attendees present, because once that the invitation goes out for the video meeting, they can share that then with other family members. So I've had other family members from various countries as well as maybe somebody in the UK. So that can be quite interesting and quite challenging. And sometimes we might be asked to arbitrate almost between family members who are all trying to manage this thing at a distance, but have all got different ideas about what should happen. So yeah, that can be quite quite interesting as well. We do get stats from Compass. Now, Compass is the platform that we use to manage our notes. Unfortunately, I wasn't able in time to get some granular statistics really to tell you more about the calls that come in from the helpline, whereabouts they're coming from really, and the people that they come from as well. But that is information that we can access if we need to. I've got three case studies then, which I just these are actually calls that I had, fairly simple and straightforward. So I had one caller whose mother was tampering with the boiler, consequently running up massive energy bills at a time when energy is really expensive. The caller lived a good distance away, so they couldn't just come round and correct things. The second case study really is a caller who lived in the UK with a loved one living in Italy who was widowed and showing very clear signs of cognitive loss and with absolutely no support network around them, and very unclear what to do next really. So the person living with dementia had shown a lot of paranoia and aggression towards a very much loved grandson when they'd flown out to see them a couple of weeks prior to the call, and that had really upset the family, so they were really stuck as to what to do. And then the third one, a caller living alone with dementia and with nobody to support her, felt that the government just wanted people like her to die, which was really very upsetting actually to listen to. So that some of the calls, the nature of the calls can be really difficult emotionally. Just sorry, go back to that one as well. And then looking at solutions really, for the first one, there were things like registering mum as a vulnerable customer, considering whether the boiler could be remotely managed. So, some household appliances now you can use sort of a Hive, I think it is. I'm not very up to date on the sort of technical side of things, but you can manage this stuff remotely. Could the boiler cupboard be locked away with some sort of keypad type lock? Then you'd have to think about, could an engineer get into the cupboard if needs be? How would you manage that? And then other things such as thinking about, was mum actually feeling cold, and was that why she was tampering with the central heating, because she was actually feeling chilly, and had an idea that the temperature setting, if manipulated, could give you more heat. But dementia is often accompanied by weight loss, as the person's appetite can decline, and that can exacerbate the feeling of being cold, but also thinking about other physical causes such as anemia. So does the lady need now to go to the GP and be checked just to double check she hasn't got some iron deficiency anemia? The second one was sort of considering the person living abroad, really, finding out about power of attorney in Italy and the differences between that and the UK. And that can be quite tricky. Managing communication to sort of minimize conflict when visiting. I did signpost to a website called My Power of Attorney, which gives you lots of information about various lasting powers of attorney across Europe, including Italy. And this particular caller did call us back, and it appeared they had managed to actually set up power of attorney in Italy as a result of that initial call. So that was really quite gratifying. And the final case really was just about giving time and validating some of the caller's sense of isolation and loneliness. And it highlighted really that no matter how little you feel you're doing as a distance carer, it is important not to underestimate the massive value that you have caring for somebody at a distance. This lady didn't have anybody and was really quite desperate to talk to someone. So don't ever underestimate what you do as a distance carer. And then we're kind of drawing to the end, really, and just wanted to talk really a little bit about guidance and support. And I've got some sort of additional information about getting, things to do with the sort of dementia and communication, etc. And just to sort of reiterate that families really are scattered now far and wide. And as a result, the person living alone who's living with dementia might hide their diagnosis, or they might forget it until the family comes home for Christmas, or they visit at some point during the year, and family then realise that all is not well. So it's not unusual for siblings to reside in different continents with young families themselves, so they can't come home and care for the person living with dementia. They want to help the best they can, and we try to help with appropriate signposting and solutions, and hence the list I've put here of some of the things that I might signpost a person to. We've had lots of calls where the person living with dementia is residing in another country. The one I've mentioned in Italy has spoken to another family whose loved one lived in Canada and again was widowed and had no support network. And the laws, of course, are very different in another country in terms of capacity and rights. And it's not a simple thing to just bring somebody to the UK. It might not be straightforward. There might be laws around that because of the loss of capacity. So I'm hoping that some of these ideas on this list might help for signposting. Some really good books as well out there. I've got the book about getting older by Dr. Lucy Pollock. Excellent book, which mentions dementia quite a lot as well. And Wendy Mitchell, I mentioned earlier, who wrote the book, What I Wish People Knew About Dementia, which is a real eye-opener. Absolutely brilliant book. And the rest of them, is things I've already mentioned. My Power of Attorney. I signpost to people like Teepa Snow on YouTube, and also to Adria Thompson on Instagram as well, for ideas about communication and just making life more peaceful, really. And that's all. That's my presentation. Thank you very much for listening. I hope you found it useful.
That's great. Thank you, Mandy. That was really, really insightful. And I said it last time as well with the Living Alone webinar, but just that kind of starting with the external research and then coming through the charity and finishing with hearing about the experiences of an Admiral nurse and supporting people. It just kind of nicely shows a follow line through. And yeah, it was really good. Thank you.